Welcome to Shifting from Grudge to Grit, Grace, and Gratitude. And you can hear Jamila is busy. It's very apt that the topic today is about toxic resilience. So I think it's going to be amazing for us to sort of dig into this conversation today. But just for those that are joining us from the replays, please, we do want your conversation to be part of this discussion as well. From my side, I know that I am a recovering toxic resilient, what are we going to call it, a player or whatever. I am still in that, I find myself in that role, being toxic resilient. And I'm sure many people are going to be able to relate to this. You know, as I said in the post when I posted this, everyone claps for resilience. We praise people for being strong. We applaud them for pushing through, but no one talks about the cost of resilience, the sleepless nights, the silent suffering, the pressure to keep it all together while you're falling apart inside, right? And the questions that I'm going to start off with is really around, what if your strength is actually a mask? We wouldn't think that, right? But maybe it is, or maybe it isn't. What if your ability to push through is silently pulling you apart? We're going to take this apart in many ways. You know, where does this come from? It's the shadow side of resilience, it's the burnout, the people pleasing, the quiet suffering, all dressed up as success. And I'm sure many that are going to be dialing in here today that are listening, and for those on the replay, can resonate with one of these archetypal roles. We're also going to look at unpacking the fine line between resilience and self-abandonment, why overfunctioning isn't a badge of honor, and what it really takes to break the cycle and lead from wholeness. So if you've ever worn this strength like armor just to survive, then you're in for a retreat, a treat. I think we must have a retreat around this conversation, because I think it needs more than just an hour. I think it would be lovely if we actually had a full day session to unpack this with a group of people, just to, you know, bring into awareness. I think the awareness is there, but what they are actually doing about it, that's what's questionable right now. Welcome, Jamila, looking all gorgeous as always.
Hi, Anissa, and I do apologize to everyone, all of our listeners, for the background noise. But unfortunately, like you say, we come in um, raw and real, and we just take it in our stride as the day is going by. But what an apt topic for us today, to talk about toxic resilience, because I don't know about you, Anissa, but I mean, you did say that you're recovering, or you have recovered. I'm aware of it. I cannot say that I'm recovering because I haven't constructively done anything about it. And as we entered into this new year, I thought that things would change this year, and I'd
Mhm.
slow things down and I'd be very deliberate about what I chose to do. But we're not even halfway through the year yet.
Mm.
And, it's just been more of the same that I've found. Um, so,
Yeah.
yes, I agree with you that there's a lot to unpack because it's quite a deep and hefty topic to
Mm.
tackle. And I don't think that there's any one of us that hasn't experienced this toxic resilience. Um,
Yeah, I mean, gosh, I do it on a daily basis. I find that I'm pushing myself, I'm doing everything, I'm everything to everyone. And last week I had the cost of my body saying, well, sorry, you're going to be down with the flu. It was a long weekend and everyone was celebrating their Easter time out. And I was flat on a couch for most of the weekend because I keep on pushing myself, and it's the next thing and the next thing and the multiple roles that we got to play. And the not saying no or no, not now. I mean, we've had parts of these discussions in many of our conversations, although we've captioned it today specifically for this. And I find that we are almost asked to be strong all of the time. We are almost expected as moms and women and entrepreneurs. I mean, you're a business owner, I'm a business owner. Where's the fine line? And when we stop to say enough is enough, and we're going to be more discerning around our time and what we bring into our energy space, right?
Yeah, absolutely, Anissa. And the thing is that we always speak about finding what our passion is in life, and then I think I've been fortunate enough um, to have found that, in the coaching and the wellness space, in my paddle, and
Yeah.
it really has brought me a lot of joy and fulfillment, and lots of enjoyment, I have to say that. But in doing so, I found that I don't put in enough boundaries. I don't limit how the amount of time that I'm spending, in doing these things, because not only is it my passion, but it is also work that I'm doing, and it's physical stress.
Yes.
Sometimes I find myself playing for like 6 hours a day, and this is on an ongoing basis, week in, week out, and then we have our events. We are now going to, we have an event on this weekend, starting from 6:30 this evening, which will probably go on to midnight, and then we start again at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, and we go to probably 10 o'clock at night, and then the next on Sundays more of the same. So when you find yourself doing things like this here, yes, you enjoy it, but there comes a time, like you say, when your body will tell you this is enough. And I think that because we place it, or we label it as passion, we think that it's okay, but it actually isn't, right? Because it's not all highs. There are the lows that are inevitable. When you're pushing your body to these limits, when you are not giving yourself enough time to rest and have that downtime, it's going to have an effect. And the body keeps score, and at some point or the other, the maths has to be done. And there's only so much that your body can take before it shuts down. And
You
I've
know,
found that I'm at that point now where I've got to make that positive decision and deliberate decision for myself.
I want to talk about, what my own personal experience. Like, I find that my sleep patterns are interrupted because my mind is always busy. And then, you kind of shrug it off to the idea of, excuse me, I'm still recovering from last week's cold. You kind of shrug it off and say, well, it might be perimenopause or menopause and it's hormonal, so sleep patterns will be interrupted. But we don't really take stock that the subconscious is so busy all of the time, because even when we are meant to be resting or in a restful position or place, we can't even rest because our minds are in a million places all at once. What have I done? What haven't I done? How much do I still need to do? Um, then there's the financial aspects as a business owner. When certain clients don't show up for whether it's coaching or mentoring sessions, that's lost income. So, you can't, you almost have, and as much as we said earlier on, even today, we're not coming from a scarcity lack mindset. In fact, it's the opposite, because we are so purposefully aligned and fortunate enough that we get to have our own business. We get to be flexible in what we're doing on a daily basis and do the things that we love. But it doesn't mean that we have gratitude and there is this, the opportunities that's been put in our path, that we have to say yes to everything. I've had to learn to even stop saying yes to going to events because I got tired. I mean, I attended a wonderful event yesterday. It was a summit, but it wasn't a summit in the traditional sense. It was short, it was succinct, it was, punchy. People were very clear on the message they wanted to impart with the audience that was there. And it was all of 4.5 hours, which is great because you're getting value, you are meeting people. It's an intentional exchange. But how many times do we say yes to events that summits are normally a day, 2 days, 3 days? And then I walk away from those summits feeling, what did I actually gain from that? So I'm at the point of asking myself that if my energy is depleted because I'm saying yes to everything, if I'm trying to make up lost income, I need to regroup and change my strategy and my vision. And there's something I need to shift. Instead of selling time for money every single time, excuse the pun, I need to start selling value for money. And what does that look like? And it's a tough juggle all the time between, hey, you need to stay resilient because you're running a business and you're providing for a family, versus actually I cannot. I don't have the mental, emotional, and physical capacity to do so.
I absolutely agree, Anissa, with that. And it's basically up to us at the end of the day to make sure that we have that balance in play. Because yes, you don't want to say no to any opportunities, but how are you going to execute that? To what level of your true potential will you be able to execute it if you are draining yourself, if you are now functioning from a cup that is practically empty? So it's really important for us to be deliberate in the decisions we make about what we involve ourselves in and what we don't. And it's really a slippery slope, and it can get away from you in an instant. I was watching a docu-series uh, recently, and it spoke about a prison in South Korea that you can actually check yourself into. I think it was called the prison within, or the prison living within, something like that. Was really very clever, and they literally mimic a normal prison. I think you stay in a 5 foot um, cell by yourself. There's no contact with any other human being. Like, you literally sit in that room. It just has a yoga mat, it has a toilet, and it has a desk with your journal. And people pay like $90 a night to check themselves into this place, because South Korea apparently is one of the um, most stressful places to live in from a professional perspective, because they work so hard, like 100 hours a week or something to that effect. And you have academics, and you have people who are in the business field, who are actually checking themselves in because they just don't have time for themselves anymore. And literally what they want to do is just sit and do nothing, and just get in touch with that presence and that present moment. And they say that they are meant to be in a 24-hour solitary confinement, and most of them opt for 48 hours. So you can imagine, as a society, how 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 terribly we've placed ourselves in such a predicament. I mean, you think about those people. Do they have families? And how does that suffer? What's the implications on that on a community? That we've come to that extent now where you've got to check yourself into a prison. In as much as it's a positive thing, because I was thinking of that Vipassana retreat that
Yes.
you went on, and it would be something similar to that, because you literally don't speak to anyone. It's silent retreat of sorts, It's called a prison, but you're paying to be in it. Um, but maybe there should be more of these available to us, so that we are shocked into the reality of this non-reality that we've created for ourselves.
Yeah. I mean, this is like intense when I hear you speak about that, and I hear how you say they shift from 24 hours to 48 hours. I can sort of relate, because the chaos that we have created for ourselves, within the systems that we operate within, it does deplete you, mind, body, soul, and spirit, right? And yes, Vipassana is great, but that one sounds a bit more intense. I wonder if I would ever want to attempt something like that, right? I want us to take a bit of a kind of a shift into understanding where this is coming from. Why do we become so resilient and toxic resilient, right? I can certainly say from my own experience, it's a wounded trauma place. It started there, uh, it was always about not be a victim of my circumstances. It was always about achieving, going for the next thing, the next goal, the next accolade, the next whatever it is. There was always something I was chasing. So that initially started from that wounded state. I want to believe that the work that I've done has certainly shifted me out of that wounded state and really moved me into more of a balanced, divine, masculine, feminine. But even I still struggle today with that toxic resilience. I have become better at saying no, or no, not now, or not yet, or no, this won't be possible at all, like an explicit no. But what about people that have no awareness, that they are simply just saying yes to everything without the knowledge and wisdom that they are harming themselves? It's a harmful behavioral trait to say yes to everything, and we're only doing it because we're seeking something outside of ourselves. So for those that are listening, and for you, Jamila, as well, I mean, I'm sure you can relate to a period in your life, and maybe even ever so often in the present day, for myself included, that you feel almost compelled to want to, and then something says, well, stop in between. Have you been able to notice yourself, stop yourself when you want to say yes? Are you taking note of those patterns? And where did yours start, this toxic resilience?
I think, Anisa, yeah, like you've said and you've touched on, is that we've all experienced it at some point in our lives or the other, right? And it's come from this broken space where we feel the need that we have to prove ourselves. And we can only do that by showing everyone else, or showing the community that this is who I am. But it's really about proving it to yourself, you know. Um, that's the issue, because you don't feel good enough. You don't feel that you are deserving of this, so you feel like, let me reflect it to the outside and prove a point to everyone else. But I think until you come to that point where you actually accept that this is something internal, this is an inadequacy that you feel within yourself, and you start to work on it, does it become better, where you start to shed the people pleasing, you start to concentrate and focus on you and what you need. But there's another part to this, where, and I've gone through this, in doing so, where I realized that it wasn't about anyone else, but then I started needing to prove it to myself. I needed to get from one goal to the next, and I had to achieve it. And for me, I thought that this was incredible. I'm pushing myself to the limits, and I'm only getting better, and this is how you succeed in life. But it actually isn't. It's about drawing boundaries. It's about understanding when you need that time by yourself, when you need to be alone with yourself. And I say alone very hesitantly, because that can also be taken to an extreme. And I found that for myself as well, is that I just thought, for me, success looked like success looked like being the sole provider, and being the best sole provider that you could be, and making sure that you were seen to be successful doing it all on your own. And as a result, you become caught up in this cycle that's continuously pushing yourself to prove something more and more and more. And before you know it, you are engulfed and overwhelmed by this. Um, and you forget, the lines become blurred about where the balance in life is. And it doesn't become anymore about keeping a family, well-balanced family life, as well as a professional life, as well as taking care of yourself. So those lines become very blurred. And I wrote about this in our book, with Peggy. Um, and everything is about soul, as in SOLE, that you forget about SOUL, you know. And I found myself in that situation, and I had to re-look at the labels that I had placed on myself, and on the success, or how I saw myself as a success in life. And I realized that I put really unnecessary and goals in place for myself. And I realized through working on who I was, through going into and delving into my shadow self, and getting to a space where I was accepting who I was, that life is about simplicity. And in the simplicity comes the happiness, in the simplicity comes the peace. So it's a journey, Anissa, as I'm sure you've gone through and you know very well. But it's a continuous journey. It doesn't end, I mean, we will continue, I think, until we sleep for and take our very last breath with toxic resilience, because it's something that we've had to deal with for so many versions, or through so many versions of ourselves. And yes, we limit and we decrease the amount of toxic resilience that we experience in our lives, but it's something that we will continue to deal with throughout our lives.
Yeah, I'm reading some comments that are coming through here. I mean, Ashif says, hello, ladies, just shared time and energy not wasted is the same gained. Self audit of reflection to take charge and realign. And then he also says, sometimes it's a quote, sometimes our stops doing list needs to be bigger than our to do list. Oh, Patty Diggs said that. Oh my gosh. Yeah, no. I can relate to that in a big way. And then on Instagram, we have Au Natural saying healthy boundaries, searching within, being at peace. Silence is sacred. I could not agree with that more. You know, what I do find, just coming back to that different versions of ourselves, it resonates there with me deeply, because the younger version of me was in survival, like majorly survival. I mean, I was on a podcast yesterday with one of our previous guests, Yaya, and we were talking about, like part of my childhood and, who was I back then? Who am I now? And then I realized something, that those versions call for certain parts of ourselves to show up in that way. And it's not for us to shame it or begrudge it, or to be disgusted in how we showed up at whatever certain time in our lives. But I certainly know that the need to be loved and accepted and heard and understood was my biggest motivator. to that toxic resilience being cultivated at that early age for me, because when you don't know where you belong and where you fit, and you're seeking for that identity and where you're going to fit into this world, you're never going to say no to anything or anyone. You are going to be the go-to person within all your relationships, both personal and professional. And as I was reflecting on that, the toxic resilience was also a reason why I had to give up my marriage. If I really am brutally honest about it, I was the one that co-created showing up all the time, running everything, taking the lead in the household, because he met me independent. So I kind of carried on with that momentum. He did not certainly say to me, you have to do it. I chose to, because it was already innately in that survival. But it's also a mask, because you're doing it, and you're doing it so for everyone. You're like the reliable person. Everyone knows they can come to Anissa for advice, guidance, holding that space, financial support, model support, whatever it needed to be. I said yes to it, because I appeared in the mask as the resilient one, the one who had it all together. But deep down inside, all I ever wanted was for somebody to catch me, was for somebody to hold me, for somebody to see that I'm really suffering. And I was, professionally at work, I'd be the first one in a lot of the times and the last one out. And even still go and work after hours and weekends, whether it is getting up at 4 a.m. in the morning and sending emails late at night or catching up with admin. I'm sure many of you that are listening to this can relate to parts of this version of myself that I was. And it made me less nurturing, less loving as a mother, as a wife, because I had to be harsh, and because I was taking on so much at any given time. So it's not an easy thing to be as bold and open about, but it really needs to go back to what is the story that dictated this toxic resilience, the suffering that we are in, this hustle, this chasing, this survival state that we are in, because it comes from a really wounded trauma place. And until we start to recognize that, and it's not easy to recognize it until a life-defining experience happens. Mine had to be my retrenchment, my being laid off. That only then became the catalyst to say the way that I was showing up in my marriage and the modeling, it was toxic. Call it toxic resilience, or call it toxic. It was toxic. So we've got to almost dig a bit deeper and almost take off all the onion layers to be able to see, where did this start? What was the root cause of it before we can do something about it?
Yeah, I think, Anissa, for many, many years in my life, I lived in this delusional experience of glorifying anything and everything that was over the top. And that was came from, the career that I was building for myself. It had to be over the top. Like you said, you were the first in and the last one out, and you glorified that. For you, it was a badge of being so dedicated, so hardworking, and you would expect the recognition to come from your superiors for that, and you wore it like a badge of honor, not knowing the consequences, the dire consequences that had, because it was over the top. There was no balance in it. And unfortunately, this is what society does. It does glorify everything that's over the limit. You can't be working just a normal 8 to 5, because then you're seen as mediocre, non-ambitious. If you're seen as working till and burning the midnight oil, oh, she's somebody who is destined to succeed. She's someone who is dedicated and has a plan for herself. And I think as women, we have to prove that even more so than our male counterparts. And when you're a single mother, as you know, it's really, really difficult. And it takes its toll on you. And it chips away at your femininity because you find yourself in this overdrive alpha space, okay, where you're continually wanting to prove and competing with your male counterparts, but in a very, very unhealthy way. And that's where you get the coldness that comes in, which extends maybe to your spouse, eventually to your children, your extended family around you, and you slowly start to lose who you truly are as a person. And I've caught myself many a time when I used to think to myself, I wish I were that version of me again. Where is that Jamila lost? She was soft and she was compassionate and she was empathetic. And then we chalk it up to, well, it's a tough world out there and you have to evolve or die. But that's really not the case. It stems from all of our insecurities. It stems from our need to be seen. It stems from our need to be seen by ourselves and to realize what our capabilities are, to realize what our strengths are, to realize what a blessing we are, and how powerful we truly are because we're born that way. And that's something that we've lost sight of. And something that we should be working really, really hard to get back. Because in allowing ourselves to do that and reconnecting with who we are at that level, and we start to chip away and slowly erode this, I don't know, it's a disease I feel, of toxic positivity, toxic resilience, all the things that we supposedly think we should be proud of, but really no, we shouldn't, because it's not natural. And I think it's about getting in touch with who we truly naturally are and recognizing the power and the strength that comes with that allows us then to make the decisions to live our best lives.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Ashif summed it up quite profoundly. The heart wants love, right? The mind wants success. The mind is connected to our egoic self, not our higher self. And the soul wants peace. So if we look at energetically, the heart is our compass. It's our guide to our North Star. It's our guide to our truth, to our beliefs, our values, and how we want to show up in this world. If we are guided by our head, we are going according to what societal, all these different systems require from us, unfortunately. I just want to say hi to Ronald. Hello, Ronald. Lovely to have you here.
Anissa, I was just going to ask you if Ronald is on because I'm calling in from my phone, so I can't see. And yeah,
Yes.
well, hello, Ronald, and welcome. Lovely to see you here again.
Yeah, so I want to go back to, I mean, Asha's point around the heart, mind versus the soul. You know, if you go back to the heart and the soul, it's really about that solace, that peace, that tranquility that we are searching for. Because I can tell you, I've had much success, but not happiness, not fulfillment. Because it was the stuff in my head that told me if I only do this, if I only show up as the following, if people can only see me for what I bring to them, then I'll stop this toxic resilience and then I'll sit back and I'll let them see that I'm actually just human and that I'm suffering, that I'm crying out for help. And what I was saying to Yaya yesterday on the podcast with her, she highlighted something quite important. And I realized that's the other thing. When you are radically independent, it leads to that toxic resilience. But when you finally realize you cannot operate like that indefinitely and you ask for help and you do not get the reciprocation of that help that you so desperately want, it's the recipe for disaster. It's the, you go into this like really confused state, but I'm showing the world that I'm not as resilient, that I do need help, and yet nobody's still willing to help me. Have you experienced that, Jamila? And how did you show up in those moments? Because what it highlighted for me was there was still some trauma and wounds around having codependent relationships. So my expectations from my relationships was that they would reciprocate. Until I realized it's codependent, only then was I able to give grace to those that really didn't show up for me and still don't today.
Anissa, you mentioned that you have the conversations with yourself that if only I will do this, if only I get to this point. And when I get to this point, things will be different and I'll be able to eventually reap the benefits of everything that I've worked so difficult, so hard to get to where I am. But do you ever get to that point? And the answer is a resounding no. Because, like I said to you, we continue and continue and continue, and our boundaries become less and less, and they seem to disappear and blur away to non existence. So, one thing that I've learned is, and I constantly ask myself this, and I ask myself, what would I do if today were my last day? And it brings you into a shocking state of reality, because we hear so many people and we read so much about the experiences of people who have been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, who are on their last laps in life, and not one of them has said that they regret you know um, not spending more time at work, or they regret chasing all the deadlines, all the goals that or the monetary gains and whatnot. Nobody does that. But we get caught up in it because we seldom think about what's our regrets going to be when the time comes. And so if you start to ask yourself that question every day and you start to live your life with the knowing and the value of time and how precious it is, um, it changes your perspective. It does. And I'm not saying that I've got it down to a T or anything like that, but I do ask myself, and it's a difficult journey to be able to remove yourself completely into that space where, all you think about is what are the best decisions that I can make for the day. But it certainly gives you an awareness of making a choice, at least for some of the most important parts of the day.
It
Um,
lets me, I
in
mean,
terms,
yeah.
yeah, in terms of your point about the codependence and the relationships that we have. For me, I think I relied on that because I had such a terrible sense of low self-esteem. I didn't believe in myself, and I always thought that I needed other people to be able to exist, to be able to make a living, to be able to, to be a success in life. And until I truly started to have that faith, that confidence, um, that self-love for me, that changed my relationships completely. And I found that I wasn't as needy as I thought I needed to be. I found that I became a lot more confident and took on more opportunities. But the most important thing was that I started to enjoy it. And it wasn't
Yes.
seen as a chore anymore. It wasn't seen as something that I needed to be intimidated about anymore. It was something that I truly, truly enjoyed. And in enjoying it, I saw a different side to myself. A side that I was proud of, because I gave myself that opportunity to be seen. And not seen by the outside world, but to be truly seen by myself.
Yeah, I mean, that's quite powerful because it does take deep introspection to come back to the self. I mean, I was trying to put Ronald's earlier comment on. He said, this is a time of deeper healing for me to acknowledge all the amazing components of my being. That's beautiful, Ronald. If today were my last day, I watched a man as his life was terminated. What did I learn from this? And then Ashif says, circling back to gratitude is what makes realize we are indeed enough. Yes. You know, that exercise of if today was the last day, I often use it with my clients, or I'll say to them in different contexts. If you're about to retire or you're contemplating that you've had enough, you're overwhelmed, you're overworked, and maybe it's time to step down, the question I ask them is if you only had 6 months remaining to turn the ship around and you want to leave a legacy, what does that look like? What does that feel like? And in the other reverse, one of my friend's husbands, he said he did an exercise with the teachers that was at their school. I think they were teaching in Saudi back in the day. He said that they would do this exercise and say, if your sibling or spouse or anyone in your daughter or son needed to write your what do you call it, your there's a word for it when they speak out in the front. I just lost my train. Uh, what's the word? When somebody's reading, when you've passed on and they read about you in the front of the memorial service or the funeral. Anyway, maybe Ashif or Ronald can help me if we don't come to it now. But if they had to write about you,
Obituary.
there we go. I lost the word somewhat, but there's another word for it as well. There's another word. But be that as it may, if they had to write it, what would they be saying about your life? That I had a client do, and he was terrified because what he said he wanted to live his life by and how others perceived it was the opposite. And so it's another dipstick measurement to start asking people while we are alive. There we go. Yes, but there's another word, man. There's another term for it, but thank you so much, Ashif and Jamila. Is it going to be true? Is it, so do that dipstick now while you're alive. Ask people, how do they see you and how do they perceive you living your life? And they'll say to you, hey, you the hero, rescuer, savior, people pleaser. Or actually, no, you were really great at setting boundaries. And I think it's a good way to ask for this feedback, because why do we have to leave it when the person has departed? So that's just a call to action I have for everyone out there is the exercise Jamila said, if you only had a short term on this earth, what would that lifestyle look like? Would you be more assertive, discerning, have boundaries in place? What would that legacy look like and feel like? I see Ronald says, that's my desire to leave legacy. I need to resolve an issue with my daughter. To listen to you helps me understand. Oh. So let's mend those relationships with ourselves first and foremost, because we cannot mend it with others if we haven't forgiven ourselves and given ourselves grace in how we didn't show up in the way that we should have. Whether it is we were toxic, resilient, or really just toxic in an egoic way in our relationships, leading with our head and not with our heart and our soul. Maybe today is an opportunity for us all to go reflect on that and say, where am I toxic just overall within my relationships? And where am I the co-creator of that? And where do I have to start saying no, no longer?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you on that. And also, I think, I say this over and over again, but it's about surrendering and accepting. when we go into the space of toxic resilience, it's always like we want to make sure that we're getting through something. You know, we've got to get through on the other side of something. Whether it's in our goals, whether it's in our careers, whether it's in the experiences that we have. And we tend to try and freeze things out. We tend to try and behave as if there are certain issues in our lives and challenges in our lives that actually don't exist. We try to convince ourselves of this. Sometimes it's important for us to sit with it, as bad as it might be. You know, sit with
Yeah.
it, accept it for what it is, and then try to move on from.
We've lost Jamila for a moment, but that's the word that I was looking for, your eulogy. So, what would that eulogy look like and read like? And then the goal isn't to live forever, yes. So Ronald says, I knew that man, but did not know him. I did not know myself. The surface chats. Absolutely. So while we wait for Jamila, I mean, I do want to go back on, parts of what we said we would cover today. And we tapped into some of this, that fine line between resilience and self-abandonment. And what does that look and feel like? And how does it manifest in our lives? Um, Welcome back, Molly.
Sorry, Anissa, I missed that
Welcome
whole
back.
segment.
All good. So what I've kind of detoured towards now is just coming back to what we said we would chat today about, and we have kind of touched on this, but that fine line between resilience and self-abandonment, right? And why do we abandon ourselves rather to say yes to everything? We spoke about that badge of honor and what it really takes to break the cycle and lead from wholeness. So, I want to just, this is the badge of honor I love to wear, that I am a cycle breaker. And I do believe in no longer perpetuating cycles that are not serving myself and the greater good. And that is why we have these conversations so that we can raise not only awareness, but taking action around it. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, look, you know what? I'm very familiar with self-abandonment. Very, very familiar because I've gone through it so many times in my life. And each time that you go through it, you begin to understand it a little bit better and a little bit differently as well.
Yes,
And you realize that abandonment comes in different forms. You know, it's also a way of trying to protect yourself. Um, as crazy as that may seem, but it protects yourself from believing that you are incapable of being successful. If you just
yes,
continue to work and work and work and work, and you cut that out of your mind about the fact that, you know what, so what if you fail? So what? That's why I say sometimes you have to sit with it and accept it. If you've done something and you've given your best, but it didn't pan out, it didn't work out. Instead of looking at it as a failure, look at it as something you should be improving on going forward. And so that's what we do, you know. In self-abandoning, we try to relabel and recreate what it is that we're going through in an attempt to protect ourselves. So when we look at it's not an option for us to fail. Failure is something that is devastating, you know, to me. And I've been through this. I just never wanted to. So it wasn't an option. It wasn't anything that I should be thinking about. But I didn't realize that I was abandoning myself in that moment.
yeah. Oh gosh, that abandonment, it's so interesting. The inverse of that is that whenever I feared abandonment or rejection, I would also go into the toxic resilience state, right? Because it was like, hell no, you're not going to let me go or let me down or reject me in any shape or form, I'll prove to you that I'm worthy and deserving and loving, and that you should touch on these things. I've asked Nikki on Instagram. I'm trying to get our audience to be more engaging. I know they're listening in but we want more voices in the room and in the studio. So please do share with us. I like this comment from Ronald. Myself adapted to many environments until it collapsed. Yes. So the mask of having it all together.
Yeah, and I don't know whether it collapses or you collapse. Because,
Yeah.
yes, we do have different versions of ourselves, but when we're doing it for the wrong reasons, it's going to come a breaking point, and you as yourself collapses. I mean, have you felt that at any stage in your life, Anissa?
Of course, I'm the one that collapsed because you face with an existential crisis of who am I and who am I showing up as? And is this the truest, authentic version of Anissa? Or is this the version that really just wants to fit and belong and, do whatever it takes to kind of, my son is trying to signal me here. He wants to make this Korean noodles here. And I'm saying, just bear with me 5 minutes. I don't know what these kids are into, this Korean noodles. I don't know if you eat it, but yeah, they love it. And I think they're getting me slowly but surely into it. But to answer your question, I digress. Yeah, I had to, like, the entire um, foundation of who I thought I am and who I thought I needed to show up as had to collapse, had to be broken down completely. That version was a false version, an illusionary version. And so, whilst toxic resilience is there, until we can break down, will we only discover that, hey, but we've been saying yes to stuff that we shouldn't have said yes to, or we've been showing up as the version that we shouldn't have been showing up as. As I said, it comes back to the story that it's connected to.
And Anissa, also like we say, we go through these different versions of ourselves in life, and it's so important for us to educate ourselves about these different versions that are coming anyway. I often think about when I was much younger, and I would think of, oh my, like when your parents are in their 40s or 50s or whatever it is, and you think, wow, they're so old. Until you get to that stage, and then you really don't feel that old, but then you have your kids who have that same impression of you. So my point being that when you go through these different versions of who you are in your life, when it comes to from a mental perspective, when it comes to your physically, your body, and what you go through, and especially us as women. And I know that this, a lot of men experience it too, but I mean, I'm speaking from my perspective here. When you get to that stage where you are at a point in your life, in your 40s, like late 40s, going on to 50, you kind of know who you are from a career perspective. You kind of know who you are as a person and all of that. And you're at this space where you've worked hard, and now, it's like the peak of your career. And then all of a sudden, all of these experiences start to happen from a physical and mental perspective. When it comes to perimenopause and when it comes to menopause, and all of a sudden you are feeling tired and lethargic and you can't work out as much as you used to. There's all this brain fog that suddenly now, invaded your mind. And I remember when I went through this here, I thought to myself, am I losing perspective of reality? Am I becoming senile? Is it Alzheimer's perhaps, that's in the family, and this is the onset of it? And I put myself under so much of pressure because I was so afraid of what was happening to me. And this is why it's so important for you to educate yourself about this, to educate yourself about women having these experiences from as early as their 30s, and it not being you declining, but it's being as something that's a natural progression and experience that you go through as a woman. And I found that I put so much of pressure on myself. I was taking it out on myself. I was self-doubting. I felt incapable from a physical perspective, in terms of my exercising and my capabilities, whether it was in playing sports or just going for a walk. I felt depressed, I felt down. It affected every other aspect of my life until I started to speak to more people, until I spoke to other women, until I read more and educated myself and realized that yes, this is a stage that you go through, but it's not something that has to be, it's not something that you define yourself as. Through diet, through medication, through education. It's something that can be dealt with, and you can continue and live a good, normal life and a successful life at that. And it changed me, my perspective 180 degrees, because from being in this depressed state because I thought I'm losing my mind, what's going to happen to me, who's going to take care of me. I'm only in my late 40s, 50. I still have many years to go. What's going to happen? Well, I'm not going to be able to, um, to be independent. And once you start to break these things down, and these are fears, right? These are your fears. It can extend to anything. I'm speaking about my experience with perimenopause and where I am at physically right now. But if you break them down and you start looking at them and attacking them in bite-sized chunks, all of a sudden it doesn't become such an impossible task to get through.
Yeah.
It changes who you are. It changes your relationships in your life. And I think it's just about that. And it's just being more educated about things that you are going through, accepting where you are at in your life. And with this education, taking the best decisions forward on how to lead your best life.
Jamila, well, I like that last quote there from Ashraf. I didn't realize who I was until I stopped being who I wasn't. Spiritual truth now. I could not agree more. So we spoke about suffering in silence, right? And yet here's a paradox here, right? Because we say that toxic resilience is often born out of chaos, conflict, trauma and wounds. And yet we suffer in silence of it. And potentially, I feel in my own experience, and we spoke about it earlier on, the education can only happen when we become silent. So, hear me when I say the silent suffering is there, but we don't have to suffer alone or to go through it alone. But it does require becoming still to be able to recognize in your body, in your heart, in your soul, and even by your mind, because if your mind is racing at hence the no sleep at night or the sleepless nights, that's a signal for you. That's a message that you are on overdrive and you need to get into silence. But we are so hardwired and conditioned to be busy all the time. Busy, busy, busy all the time, because busy means productive. And yet it can be counterproductive if we're sitting in that suffering. So I must admit, I have had a craving, and I know we mustn't crave or desire because, as the Buddha says, it's the root to all suffering, craving and desires. I do find that I'm craving the stillness to be able to take stock and do an audit around where am I actually toxic resilient? Because at the moment I'm on autopilot. I do what I need to do And as much as I'm sitting in that abundance growth mindset, somewhere beneath that is still sitting toxicity because of that need to be on autopilot and do things, deliver this, speak to so many clients, what the system dictates we should be doing, right? So I want to close off from my side to say, get silent, get still, connect to yourself, connect to the sensations in your body because there are many messages it's sending you. Connect to the fact that when you are ill or you're being pulled down with a cold or any other type of diagnosis when you get sick, it's there because there's something there that is not healthy and optimal. So that's my closing point on our conversation for toxic resilience. Anything you want to say to close out?
Yeah, Anissa, I think, don't be fearful of finding out exactly who you are. And don't be fearful of going out and achieving everything that you so deservedly need.
Yes.
Expect for yourself, because you do deserve it. Um, don't be afraid because you have this inner strength within you that can see you through absolutely anything and everything in your life. But like you said, at the same time, find the moments to find your peace. Find the moments
Yeah.
to find that stillness. And in that stillness, you will find out who you truly are. And that's what breaks down every bit of toxicity in your life, every bit of doubt that you might have, and every bit of insecurities that you may feel.
There is one comment. He is not one of my connections or any of our regulars. So, firstly, thank you for joining our live stream, and we do hope to see you and hear from you on many more. And if you do feel called to be on this conversation or in studio with us, don't hesitate to reach out either to Jamila or myself and share with us maybe a potential topic of interest that you'd like to share and enlighten us on, because this is quite an enlightened comment. Resilience without self awareness can quietly erode the very foundation it's meant to strengthen. True leadership demands we build from wholeness, not just endurance. Powerful, powerful, powerful quote. I think it sums up today's conversation beautifully. And I would love to almost end off on that note and ask if there's anything else from anyone around this topic. And if you do have any more contributions to this topic, I really do feel it warrants a 1 day or a weekend retreat, because we're wanting that silence and to get in touch with ourselves. Maybe this could be an idea for a weekend retreat. Let us know your thoughts on that. And if it's something that you would love, if you are in Cape Town, that is, or if you're willing to fly to Cape Town, South Africa for something like that. So just putting it out there. Jamila, any closing comments from you?
I think that's a fantastic idea, and I think we should definitely pursue it, Anissa. I think it's the most beautiful gift that anyone can give to themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Jamila, for showing up, for being here. We have reached the end. Thank you, Ashif, Ronald, everyone else that's watching may not be commenting. For those that watch the replay, we appreciate you. This has been episode number 70, believe it or not. It's a round number to celebrate nonetheless. And we show up resiliently with love and not in a toxic way, we'll admit. And we strive to continue showing up here and having these real raw conversations. Until next week from my side. I won't be here next week. Are we going to have this next week? No.
Anissa, I think next week we won't be having our usual Friday afternoon, so we will resume from the week after.
I must admit, I have rectified my schedule is actually not a full day next week, Friday. So we can, if there is somebody who would like to join us in the live stream, let us know. But But if you need time off, Jamila, let me know and we can discuss that
No,
offline.
I'm concerned about you, and I don't want you to adopt that toxic resilience and take on too much.
No, it wasn't. It was wrongly placed in my diary that it's a full day training. It's
Well,
not.
then,
I'll be
fantastic.
available.
So we will see you guys same time, well, not same place, but hopefully from a much less noisy background. And I hope that somebody decides to join us, or
Yes,
a few people decide to join us, because we'd really like this to become a lot more interactive. Um,
yes, yes.
Anyone and everybody is welcome. Anissa, I mean, like, we can have up to how many guests did you say?
Up to 10 in total in studio. So we can have
So
8 guests.
yeah, so please, on Naturel, you are a regular every week. Ronald, you're a regular. Ashish, please just feel free to jump on, and let's just have these deep, real conversations. We don't have to have a specific topic in mind. Like we said, this is a space where we can actually just be still, be present, and have conversations about how we can have more of these moments.
Okay, so I'll see you again next week. Take care, Jamila. Good luck with your
Thank,
tournament in the paddle.
thank you so much. Bye bye, everyone.
Bye.